I'd like to talk a bit about the design patterns that we've used within PulseTile and the various visual conventions that we've applied to try and make things simpler and more consistent throughout the different areas of the system. So our initial login screen kind of demonstrates a very simple panel, and PulseTile is made up of these individual panels or tiles. Within a panel we essentially have a heading, and we may have functionality within this area here. And then we have content below. So that could be a form, it could be a table, it could be a chart, it could be some read-only labels and values. And then normally at the bottom we have some controls. In this case, we have an action button which is coloured with the brand colour of the platform, and a more passive button which would call a modal in this case. And those are the basic constructs of an individual panel within the system. We try to follow that through in most cases. So as we log into the system, obviously we have various things at the top, which we try to keep consistent. So these will always be fixed throughout the experience whilst the user's logged in. And here we have a panel with a little bit more information. So this is showing a table. We have a search feature and the ability to switch the view from a table view to something else if required. So here's an example having performed a search for patients matching the term Keddy. We can see a table here which shows all the pertinent information relating to all matching patients with the surname Keddy. We have a pagination control which allows us to page through the individual results. And on the right hand side we have an add button. This would display a panel showing all the information should we want to add a patient into the system. When clicked, the table reduces in width and another panel on the right hand side appears showing a form containing all the pertinent patient information we'd need to enter. And down at the bottom we follow the convention of having an action button at the bottom and a cancel, which would obviously change state. The close button, which is marked with the X at the top, would effectively revert the view back to the full screen listing and discard any changes made. Clicking View on the button on any patient within this list would take you through to the patient dashboard. Now this shows essentially a summary of all the information related to this patient that we've chosen. On the left hand side we see all the individual areas of their record that we might want to investigate, and within the dashboard we can see a brief summary of the top 4 records for each of these sections. As we cycle through, clicking within Problems and Issues, for example, again we see the same pattern with a table view showing all the records within Problems and Issues. In this example we can see that the user is highlighted over a row within Problems and Issues as indicated by the dark grey colour. Clicking within this record would then bring up the information related to that individual problem or issue. And that's essentially as far as our user experience would go within this section. However, other sections, such as for example contacts, allow users to edit information within their patient record. And so we can see down here that we have an edit button which essentially would transform this view from a read-only into an editable view, changing all the individual fields into form elements and adding an extra finished button here to commit the changes. So a good example of how the PulseTile pattern has been applied to a fairly complicated data set was with some work we did a few months ago with the respect form. This captures some critical information about a patient and asks for quite a lot of specific detailed information over a number of pages. So we developed a version of PulseTile with NHS Scotland branding to present how this information would be matched within the patterns of PulseTile. And here we have an initial patient multi-patient view screen that kind of launches everything, and we can see going into a patient's similar experience. When we get into the respect form, however, we've actually broken the form into within a table and shown each section as an individual record. And as we go through, we can see that we've actually allowed linear progression through the typical table control and then the edit screen on the right hand side. So the user can easily switch between individual sections of the form and be presented with a form related just to that section. So in this case we have personal information we can see that information being provided. Then we move into the second section, which has multi-line text boxes. Here we have an example of a rage slider being used to indicate a given level of priority. I think the beauty about this implementation of PulseTile is how far we've been able to stretch the requirements without really changing the fundamental patterns. We haven't introduced any new types of display. Any user using any other section of the system or any version of PulseTile in the past will be familiar with the overall user experience, this kind of this paneled approach, information on the left hand side being used to define a collection of things, and the information on the right being used for the detail. Whilst we split out the form into a number of different sections, nothing is ever too overwhelming, and it doesn't present any usability challenges to the user.